Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
All right, welcome to International Symposiums on Linguistics and Educations. It is the third installment. Before we are going to start, I would like to show you the agenda of our activity for today. So, it is the agenda of our webinar for the third installment. So the first session, it will be presented by Siliwan PhD candidate from Masih University. For the second session, it will be presented by Zulfa Sakia, MD, PhD from Universitas Negeri Semarang. And it is followed by session 3, question and answers, and then the last is closings. All right, ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please, for a while? All right, so our symposium is about to begin. Please have a nice seat and connections. Good, thank you very much for preparing yourself to join our symposiums. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Respectable the Headmaster of English Education Departments, Ms. Siti Nuraini PhD, the Honorable all English lecturers, English teachers, as well as English students, and the Honorable all participants of this symposiums. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dias Andri Susanto, the moderator of today's symposium. So I'm very pleased to see you here and welcome all of you to this symposiums. Today's topic is about critical discourse analysis in language educations. Dear participants, today we have two great speakers with the trends and interesting topics they are going to present. Our first speaker today is Shirley Huang, PhD candidate from Massey University, New Zealand. She is an energetic and passionate young female with adaptability and flexibility in multitasking and working. She enjoys challenging herself and exploring more possibilities and beauties in her life. She is expert at analytical and research, including qualitative analysis using NVivo and quantitative research using SPSS and Excel. She is also good at communication and cooperation. She works as a language teacher. She provides lessons for students from different countries and cultures, which improve her communication skills. And she is also good at adaptability. She studied in several provinces in China, and now she is pursuing her PhD degrees in New Zealand. Ladies and gentlemen, the first speaker is presenting her topic about the combinations of research to improve learners' willingness to communicate. Now, allow me to welcome Shirley Huang, PhD candidates to deliver her presentations. Ms. Huang?
Can you hear me?
The floor is yours.
Yes. Should I interrupt your share screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Can you see my PowerPoint? Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Diaz. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today and present to you on the topic of how to measure learners' willingness to communicate. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Huang Huan, and I'm currently a PhD student at Massey University. Oops. Sorry about that. Yeah. So for today's presentation, I will be covering 4 topics. The first one, the definition of willingness to communicate, here WTC in short, and literature review, and my PhD project called Willingness to Communicate in Chinese Research. And the last part is pedagogical suggestions. So to begin with, I think it's important to recognize that since 1970s, speaking has become a goal of language learning, but also its way to learn a language. As Leslie Freeman said, it's not that you learn something and then you use it. Neither is that you use something and then you learn it. Instead, it's in the using that you learn. They are inseparable. So we might find some students, they might have great vocabulary knowledge, they might have great grammar knowledge, or they might have deep knowledge of content, but they might have something that blocks their communication. So now the study of this something that blocks communication or boosts their communication is known as willingness to communicate. Moving on to the next slide, I will be talking about the definition of WTC, why we need to study WTC, and then I will talk about its important model. So second language willingness to communicate has often been defined as a readiness to enter into the discourse at a particular time with a specific person or persons using the second language. Inswan's output hypothesis proposed that through language production, learners not only test out the hypothesis of what they think they know about the second language, but they also move from understanding to production. And many researchers have been aware of the importance of willingness to communicate. So here I list some, so it can be like ultimate goal of language instruction, a request for successful language learning, or a final step before the actual second language use. Now I'm going to talk about this kind of like a little bit complex model. It's very useful to look at Michael Entire, Clements, Donnie, and Doyle's heuristic model of willingness to communicate. This was first proposed in 1998. So I will start the layer 1 and just go down through the pyramid. So the top of the pyramid we see here as the actual speaking or communication behavior. And directly below, that is the description of psychological factor of willingness to communicate. And that means willingness to communicate doesn't always lead to communication for various reasons, such as interruptions. But the idea is that the willingness to communicate indicates the students will speak. Factors that have very direct, immediate influence on willingness to communicate: desire to communicate with a person, either control someone, such as ordering food in the restaurant and getting waiter to bring things, or it might be affiliation reasons, just become friends with someone more. Next to this, this breaks the idea of state communicative self-confidence. So whether somebody has confidence to speak or the confidence to enter a conversation at that time and in that situation. So this changes from situation to situation. So factors below this, interpersonal motivation and intergroup motivation. Intergroup motivation reflects the desire to belong to a certain group. This will impact on control affiliation needs. Interpersonal motivation reflects the role that somebody wants to fulfill within a group. So for example, if you want to become a leader in a group, and also at this level, self-confidence has an impact factor on motivation. So here is the self-confidence in general. And in the fifth further down the pyramid, we see intergroup attitudes, which is the question of how we might perceive another group, whether we want to affiliate with people from another country, or whether we wish to desire to learn English to speak with people, for example, from New Zealand. Next to this level is the social situation. The idea is that things such as being at school, being at work, or being at home, or will impact on when to communicate. Next to this is our actual ability in language or communicative competence will stronger influence at this level. So, and move down to the final layer is the integral climate, which looks at the very general cultural backgrounds of people from different groups who are trying to communicate, and things such as whether one culture is considered to be richer or more powerful and more interesting than another nation can have also impact a role here. And also personality is important as level as well. For example, extroverted people are more likely to be talkative. So to understand these pyramids, we need to understand at the top first three layers are considered to change often. So when it's communicate change will depend on the state, the situation, the time, the people that you are talking with, and the bottom three layers, 4, 5, 6 are very stable influences, so tend to stay the same over time. And so the top three have much more immediate and closer importance in impact on what is communicates. Now I'd like to talk about the definition, so the nature of when it communicates. I made two categories. One is the trait, another is dynamic one. So first, trait when it communicates, which is a stable tendency for some people to speak more than others over a long period of time. Enduring predisposition, for example, so you may find some students, they are quite active in Bahasa, Indonesia. I'm not sure, is that right? Yeah, so they will use the Indonesian language with his friends, but he sits silently in his English class. We call this enduring influences enigma, which means learners who have personality toward talking, but unwilling to communicate by seizing second language communication moments. And the second one is dynamic one, which means state when it's communicate. So this is a state of mind or a feeling of being communicated at a particular moment with a particular person or persons that can fluctuate or change a great deal in a short time. We might find even the most introverted or the most anxious students, they sometimes become talkative, right? Or you might find some students with outstanding test scores. You heard him speaking fluent English in his small study group, but why doesn't he speak up in front of class? So this we call situational influences enigma, which means learners who are competent second language learners, but for some situationally dependent reasons are unwilling to grasp the second language communication opportunity. So we might wondering, how should we measure their willingness to communicate, because it's such a huge difference here. So in what ways we can accurately evaluate learners' willingness to communicate? So moving on to the next slide, I will be talking about empirical studies about measuring when to communicate. I simply divide them into 3 parts. I will start with the first one, which have been studied since 1998. So it's a simple question. You might ask that why do some people sick while others avoid communication in their second language or maybe in English? So originally research centered on this trait-like perspective that emphasized the stable tendency. So research on this level, which means traits when to communicate, has adopted the questionnaire survey scales or some sort of. Due to time constraints, I'm not going to display the details of this scale, but with bear in mind that the assumption as one communicates is a stable characteristics here. An individual or a person will carry with them a predisposition towards communication from one situation to the next. Typically, and measured only once by the researchers and considered to be relatively stable. So this is very efficient way to collect data, especially you can collect data in a large sample if you got a group of students. And the findings can be statistically generalized, whereas these scales can identify how high or low one is to communicate for the person. They don't directly address the question of why one is to communicate as high or low, nor it's how it changes from moment to moment. So to answer the question, the factors that might impact when to communicate, here I'm going to talk about another method, which is qualitative methods, such as interviews, focus groups, journals. So you might use that with small sample sizes. You can hear your students' inner voice to see how they perceive the topics or how they think your teaching methods, your teaching styles, or you might hear their needs, why they study English, or sort of like this. And so in more and more situational variables, by using the qualitative methods, exerting influence on second language learners can take into account, such as we mentioned before, and such as another group sizes. Some students might prefer to speak up in small group or the teacher's feedback, for example, positive feedback or corrective feedback, or the time you give them feedback. Maybe you immediately give them feedback after they made some mistakes, or the amount of feedback, how much feedback do you want to give them, and also culture orientation, classroom atmosphere, and immersion context. Qualitative studies of when it communicates have produced interesting results concerning some of the more subtle process, maybe small process involved in making people more or less willing to communicate. But interestingly, the results reviewed, there is no clear difference between situations creating willingness to communicate and unwillingness to communicate. For example, this quote, you can see here, this quote is from my study, and Tony, this student, he wrote in his journal, he said, when we talk about Bing Mayong, which is the tourist sport in China, this is the terracotta warriors. I want to talk a lot more about my experience, but felt very restricted as I didn't know the vocabulary for that topic. So, which means this situation, to talk about the Bing Mayong, this tourist sport, actually he was very willing to communicate because he wanted to share his personal experience to his tutor. But he just stepped back because because he didn't know the vocabulary means that maybe he has some difficulty in retrieve the vocabulary, and then it suddenly become unwillingness to communicate. So so we might think from a measurement perspective, how does the research focus on these subtle reasons for change in willingness to communicate? And more recently, researchers have been emphasizing that although there are general tendencies in communication, like we talk about in the first level in the questionnaire, so willingness to communicate also fluctuates a lot within a given communication situation. So changes in willingness to communicate are produced by a lot of interacting complex dynamic systems that integrate psychological, linguistic, educational, and communicative factors in real time. A degree of willingness to communicate may rise and fall rapidly, very quickly on a per second basis, and is unpredictable. And so dynamic willingness to communicate since here 2011 called for new conceptualization of willingness to communicate. This also due to increased impacts of the complex dynamic system theory. So I call them CDST later. And the research, the focus of the research shifted from the micro perspective to micro, from macro to micro perspective. Before we are talking about what approaches used to measure dynamic willingness to communicate, now I will talk the criteria to collect the data in this theory, complex dynamic system theory. So as you can see here, if we want to know how an individual or a group develops over time, so if you want to know the willingness to communicate develops over time, we need the data that is dense, for example, collected at many regular measurement points, longitudinal, so which means collected over a long period of time, and individual, which means for one person at a time, not averaged out. As we mentioned that the way we used to evaluate learners' trait willingness to communicate, so normally the survey or the questionnaire was handed out to the participants once or at least twice. So which means we can collect the data at one point or at most two. So even though it can display the changes at some degree, but a single wave of data doesn't tell us much about how or why a change has occurred, right? So through qualitative studies on willingness to communicate, we have investigated several factors or processes which influence willingness to communicate. However, it couldn't show us the degree of change and the trajectory of fluctuations of willingness to communicate. Maybe it's linear, non-linear, or stable. So it can be noted that only collecting qualitative data through interviews, focus groups, journals doesn't meet this criteria. So which means the more data collection points incorporated in the study, the better. Thus, to address this criteria, the data are dense, longitudinal, and individual. Unique methods are necessary to collect such data. So here, I will talk about three methods that meet this criteria due to the first two methods were conducted in my study. So I just step in that these two. For anyone who might interested the third one, the observations, you can search online. So now I'm going to talk about ideodynamic method. So ideo means individual, dynamic means change. So this method developed by Michael Entire and Legato in 2011. This is a level mixed methods approach to capture moment by moment dynamic fluctuations in second language learners when to communicate during specific communicative task performance. So it contains 3 parts. The first one, video recording of a communicative event. So if you want to use this method in your study, you have to record the participants' conversation, maybe video or audio. And the second one is you ask the participants to use the software to rate, to evaluate his wants to communicate. And then after that, you can use the stimuli record interviews. Now I'm going to talk about this step by step. Basically, this is what the software looks like. And you can see here, it's very easy. It's very simple to use this software. So here it's the increase when to communicate, and here is the decrease when to communicate. So which means after you finish your maybe class, or maybe after the participants complete the conversation, you upload the video into this software. And then when students was watching his videos, and then he can, or the participants can press the button here, and then he will say this is the levels of willingness to communicate from -5, which means extremely unwilling to communicate. And here the 5 score, which means extremely willing to communicate. So yeah, so it's very easy to use this software. After that, you just click the finish, and then you will get the this picture, this output graph generated by the software. And then you combine the video and also the graph to as a stimulus into your interview. So you can use this to the videos or graph to ask them why there is the high willingness to communicate or no willingness to communicate, and then you can just match the time in the video, and then you can get much rich data here. So by using the ideodynamic methods, we can examine the detailed ways in which communication trees operates in practice, right? As they unfold in real time, generating the dense individual level data that CDSD requires. Communication has ebbs and flows that characterize a process that can change suddenly and in unpredictable ways. And also, ideodynamic methods studies typically are conducted in a controlled setting, which is lab-based studies. It can be criticized for this is the artificial communication environments. And also, if you use the video recording equipment, or subsequent interviews are not naturally occurring parts of interpersonal communication. So recently, a Polish group of researchers, they have been using the experiencing sampling method to study the willingness to communicate in classroom context. So before this, they used the ideodynamic method to conduct their study in the lab-based settings. And now they can use the experience and sampling method to collect the data in the classroom. So, and I'm going to show you this instrument looks like. So experience and sampling, which means you require the participants to report what they are doing and how they are reacting at fixed or random intervals in response to the sound. So basically, I'm going to show you, this is my study. And so I call this is WTC grade. And then you can see the grade looks like this. So basically, I ask my participants to evaluate or to rate their willingness to communicate in every 5 minutes during their class. So it's also the scale from -5 to 5. And so, for example, in my presentation, if I want to develop your willingness to communicate, I will ask you to know your willingness to communicate down to this grade in every 5 minutes. When you hear like this, and then you just write down your willingness to communicate. And then after I got this data from you, I will cross-reference with my with my detailed presentation plans, my slides, and maybe indicating the activities in progress at the time of each BIP. And so I will know you might want to talk or ask a question or sort of maybe in literature review, or maybe here you don't really know how to use this grade. So so this is the experience in sampling method. And so this Polish group of researchers have been using this type of method to study willingness communicates in the second language classroom context, where students capture their ratings of willingness communicates in response to the BIP. And that occurs several times during the classroom lesson and also maybe during the semester long course. So this method is very flexible and allows for minimal disruption in the naturally occurring activities. So if you pay attention, like a semester or a lesson, you can set 5 minutes interval during your class. But if you just if you are looking at the dynamics of willingness to communicate in a shorter time, such as a 5-minute long task, for example, monologue or dialogue, you can set like here 30 seconds interval to collect your data. And we talk about this is more naturalistic measurement, but sometimes it's intrusive because I have to collect the data during the class. Now I'm going to talk about my PhD project, which is the dynamics of willingness to communicate in synchronous Chinese online language teaching and learning. Synchronous, which means real time, and I'm going to show you some findings by using the methods I've talked about before. Because my study focused on the New Zealand students learning Chinese. So here, the WTCC means willingness to communicate in Chinese. My study is part of the synchronous Chinese online language teaching. The project is a partnership between Massey University and the Beijing Language and Culture University. This concept is based on tutorials bringing together a training Chinese language teacher from BLCU and a Chinese language learner from Massey University in a series, one-to-one Chinese tutorials. Here is the screen short. The tutor, she was in Beijing, and the student, she was in New Zealand. They were having their practice. Normally, we use the Zoom as learning platform like us now. And so this Scout offers numerous advantages. Designers, practitioners aim to provide not only enough opportunities, but also personalized ones with learners to practice their Chinese and emphasize the tutorial should be tailored learners' needs. So because this is one-on-one platform, which means one student and one learner, one student and one tutor, so you can meet the learner's needs, right? But even though we do want to know from learner's perspective how they perceive these opportunities. And specific, how about learners' perceptions on what is communicated in this setting? So this is my research question. I'm going to use the CDST system, complex dynamic system theory perspective can uncover the dynamics of what is communicate in Chinese, representing different but interacting time scales in the scaled environments. And I conceptualize the what is communicate in Chinese in different scales across over a series of sessions. Here is 10 sessions and change within one session, and then maybe change even per second. And so I'm going to give you the findings about this one by one. Before this, so before they started their sessions, students were asked to fill in the questionnaire. We talked about this before, right? And then you can see here the Tony, his willingness to communicate traits, it's 1,300 score, which is very, very high willing to communicate. And also he perceived himself as low anxious person. So I'm going to report this learner specifically. So the first one, I'm going to collect the data change over a series of sessions. And so when it comes to this level, I asked Tony to rate his willingness to communicate in Chinese after each session using the scale from 0 to 100 to rate his willingness to communicate in that session. And so you can see these results showed his willingness to communicate in this 10 sessions changed a lot. And also it shows the ups and downs of his willingness to communicate based on his self ratings. And so this one, 95 score, this is the highest point, and the lowest point is only 35%. We can see here the level of this general trend when it's communicate underwent comparable changes from one session to the next in the first 6 sessions, and then there were rise after 6 sessions. So we might take here as the changing points. The second one is to look at the learners Tony's willingness to communicate change within one session. And here is the 4th session and the 9th session. You can say it's very different. For example, in the 4th session, it's diminishing when it's communicated, right? And then the 9th one is constantly high. For this research question too, I used the experience in sampling method, which means Tony rated his willingness to communicate in a grade in every 5 minutes. And after that, they will. He was also asked to write a journal related to the situations in which he felt most willing, unwilling, or conflicted to communicate. And so the number in the horizontal axis stands for the beep. Sorry, here is not clear enough, but I will display later. So this one means the beep sound and means the time in every 5 minutes. And then this number in vertical axis stands for the ratings from Tony. And this colorful boxes refers to activities performed in that session. And you can see this is the 4th session. Basically, his willingness to communicate decreased from beep 1 to beep 5. And in his journal, he said, unfortunately, in this lesson, I couldn't find any private rooms. So there are some background noises that were distracting me. It was quite public, and there was a lot of people in the same room, and they could hear me speak Chinese. So I wanted to finish this lesson as soon as possible. So we might say this is because the physical background setting nor his willingness communicates. But the interesting thing is here, you can see there is a huge increase. So the last beep sounded when they quite nearly finished their lesson, and the tutor had brought up the pictures of himself skydiving. Tony was very excited because Tony is a pilot. He used to fly around the world. So yeah. So when he saw the pictures and his willingness to communicate in Chinese at that moment increased here. And this surge might have been caused by his interest and in an activity with some relation to his own job. Now, I'm going to talk about another session. So this one is my session. As you can see, his willingness to communicate remains stable here, and also very high. And as he said, I was most willing to communicate at the start of this lesson. Prior to the lesson, Ji Yao, the name of the tutor's name, had sent me a video to wish me Merry Christmas. Unbeknown to me at that time, this was actually Ji Yao singing a Christmas song on piano. When I found out it was him playing the piano and singing, this really surprised me, as I thought he was really talented. I also enjoy playing piano, so I had some interest in topic. I asked him where he learned to play, and he replied that he was self-taught. This shocked me even more and prompted me to ask questions for vocabulary, such as 难以想象 means incredible. So we can see here because he felt very excited to start his lesson, and but we do find some maybe decrease here. But in Tony's journal, he also explained this decrease. He said, throughout the lesson, the lowest point of willingness to communicate was graded as 4, as I was coming down from my initial excitement. However, in comparison to previous lessons, I was very engaged and wanted to keep it chatting, even though we run out of time. Now I'm going to talk about how I collect data in the single interactions. So which means the learners want to communicate fluctuates even per second. So I use the ideal dynamic method, which we talked about before. So this moment occurred after they finished their reviewing words, and the tutor was surprised the learner's performance because he can remember all the words, and the tutor said, "Oh, you're a good language learner." And after receiving these compliments, Tony, Tony, you can see you can see the line 4. Tony interrupted the conversation when his tutor started to move to the next stage by asking about how Ji Yao get along with his new job. And you can see here there are 2 spikes. In Tony's interview, he mentioned because he was quite quiet in this lesson compared to the last lesson, because I just thought to let him try to actually teach something, which means he wanted to have general chat, not just learn something, right? Last time I ended up just chatting for the sake of chatting, but in this one, I just thought that was the opening opportunity to start talking. So you can see these two spikes happened when he opened up this conversation. We can also know that the students had the agency to open up a new conversation to change his state. I think my time is almost there. So I'm not going to share this moment. But before I finish my topic, I'm going to talk about some pedagogical suggestions. Actually, I haven't finished my project, so I couldn't be able to give you more pedagogical guides increasing learners want to communicate. But here, these suggestions from these two authors, if you're interested to this, you might find this online. So there are several suggestions. For example, the first three, just to find out what factors affecting your learners want to communicate, and then encourage learners to plan for hesitations. For example, if the students forgot the words, maybe you just give him some time to plan, and then to look to the potential future possibilities to use the target language. Because, for example, if students want to learn English to maybe have a job, to be or maybe study in English speaking countries, you might ask them to think about this. And then also you can increase the classroom excitement and a sense of security. So for example, in the night session, the student feels so excited about the video, and also use the group work to facilitate greater self-confidence, social support, and the willingness to communicate. And don't lose sight of important distal willingness to communicate factors, for example, intergroup climate, and raise learners want to communicate of their personalities and the dispositional temperaments. And the last two, remember that anxiety is felt at all levels of proficiency. Even for me, now I'm present my top here, I still feel a little bit anxious. So you just remind them it's normal thing, it's common, right? And hit the significance of self-esteem in one's communicates. So that concludes my presentation today. Thank you for listening and welcome any questions. I will hand over back to Dr. Diaz.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wan. That is very interesting and informative presentations. Just for information that the participants of this conference or symposium is about, most of them are English lecturers, followed by English teachers and magister students, as well as, and some others are from practitioners, English practitioners. That's why there will be very interesting discussions later on. I personally have two questions actually, dealing with how do we resolve enduring influence and situational influence, enigma, right? And followed by how do we, enhance our interpersonal motivations, but do not answer it in prisons because it will be any other sessions. Thank you, Ms. Hans. For the participants, would you please keep for a while your questions, or you may take your question on the chat box. And now on, we are going to welcome for second presenters.
Good morning, Dr. Zulfa.
Good morning, Dr. Nung. Dr. Andres Diaz.
Assalamualaikum, Zulfa.
Salam. How are you doing?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, with the Omicron is looming. I hope everyone is safe and sound.
We're trying to, so we avoid the hotspot at the moment.
Yeah, that's a good move and a very necessary move, I guess.
Yeah, because it's we're not allowed to use our usual venue, so we have to move place, but there's only 6 of us that are handling this event. So far
Right.
so good. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Now we come to the second presenters. Her name is Zulfa Shakya, MPhil PhD from Universitas Negeri Semarang. All right, so her current positions are Head of Literacy Research, Head of English Laboratory, Kepala Laboratorium, all right, and member of Indonesian Young Scientists. She is very active in writing research articles published in international reputable journals, Scopus Index. That's very good. She also has published many references books and teaching books. Along with this, she's also a journal reviewer at some international reputable journals publications. So she has many achievements that I cannot mention them one by one, but some of them are Australia Alumni Grant Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Australia 2021 and Indonesian Democracy Karl Marx Research Initiative, the University of Melbourne 2020. Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, here is the second presenters presenting with the topic finding alternative voices using critical discourse analysis in educations. Ibu Zakia, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very kind invitation, Dr. Nung Aini, as the head of the department. It's been an honor to go back home to UGRIS. UGRIS was once my home because in 2006 and up to 2008, I guess I was teaching there and I had a good time. So it's been really a delight to go back home. Right. Am I audible, by the way?
Yep. Yes, you
Yep.
are very
Yeah.
audible. Yeah. Okay. So welcome home.
Welcome.
Share screen. Yeah, I'm at home. I know. Wait. Yeah. Okay, is it up now, the screen? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so in the first presentation, in the first session, Shirley has discussed more about learners' willingness and to look at the phenomena, the linguistic phenomena from a pedagogical perspective. So my session will try to go out of the classroom walls and try to look at this kind of linguistic phenomena from a broader perspective, from the relationship between language and society, and that's why we're talking about discourse. However, I'd like to sharpen the topic. It's not discourse in general, but how to use discourse analysis, critical discourse analysis, especially in education, and how to find alternative voices, or some people just call it the concept as resistance. But just before we start, I like everything to be more interactive. I don't want to be too monotonous. I'd like to hear your feedback and your comments on what discourse is. I'd like to know what you have understood so far about discourse. So please visit menti.com. You can use your gadget, your phone, or you can just go to another tab in your laptop to menti.com, and then there is this Dropbox, just a chart in there or a bar, and please input this 8 digits of number 18, 58, 59, 13, and 23. Tell us what you know about discourse. What comes to your mind when you hear the word discourse? Okay, maybe around 1 or 2 minutes. Yes. Gimana Pak Dias? Sorry, did you say something? No. Okay.
No.
Okay. Right. So I'd like to hear your opinion about this. So I know that you've got several understanding, and I'm sure here, I know that Pak Dias is working on discourse in his latest dissertation. He is a newly minted doctor from our university, and he's also working on discourse. So what comes to your mind when you hear the word discourse? Okay. And Menti here, I choose the word cloud, so you can only contributed words or keywords. It cannot be like a whole paragraph or a whole sentence. Okay, I'll get back to you. Sorry, stop share. Yeah, and I will go to Safari. I have to share screen, please. Okay, right. Only two people, speech and writing. Is it? Yep, yang lain silakan. What is discourse? What comes to your mind when you hear the word discourse? Let me close the door. Yeah, we've got writing, sentence, speech. Okay. Others. Is this the first time you hear the word discourse? I don't believe so. But I'm sure you've got some ideas of what discourse is all about. Yeah, or maybe I'll just, so the number is there, or I'll copy this and put it in the chat box. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Bufestin. Yeah, that's the number, 1859 1323. Or you can just simply click on the link that I have provided in the chat box. Okay, I want everyone's participation here. Okay, good. Communication. Yeah, we've got writing, sentence, communication. Yeah, more is coming. Wacana. This is good. So that's what we, the Indonesians, translate the word discourse as wacana. Okay. When the keyword is highlighted, or it's bigger than the others, and it's in the center, that means that the word is repeated. Okay, so it's not only once that people has entered the word. So that means that's the dominant response from this group. Speech, context, communication, text, writing. Okay. Sudah nggak ada lagi? Okay, this is all. All right. Some of you might think that discourse is a way to communicate. Yeah, maybe. And some of you also might think that discourse is a text, right? But here you also have context. So maybe it's both of them. And here you say it's writing or it's speech. Speech means it's a spoken mode of communication. Whereas writing is the written mode of communication, or it's just a mere sentence, or wacana, the Indonesian word of discourse. So which one is it? So this is a good part of, okay, more is coming, written or, okay. So maybe you have it's too long, so that's why Menti has to cut it down or break it down into 2 parts. So it's still writing, right? And these are all actually the misunderstandings of what we've got about discourse. And what we are going to discuss today is much more specific. It's critical discourse analysis. And to what kind of extent that CDA perceives discourse as. So we're going to discuss that further. Allow me to go back to okay, right, yeah. So thank you very much for your participation. Oops, wait. Oh no, not this one. Yeah. Okay, so one of you has mentioned that discourse is wacana, but is this the very proper equivalence of discourse? We might hear people say, alah apa sih ini Bapak berwacana-wacana aja nggak ada prakteknya gitu ya. That's the way we perceive discourse in Bahasa Indonesia. Wacana is something that you just keep talking, but you don't do the real action. So you don't walk the talk. You just simply talking. That's what we understand of what wacana is in the context of Bahasa Indonesia. But actually, discourse is just more than that. It's not just simply talking. It's not just simply rhetorical. It's not simply written forms of language, but it's more than that. Okay, so in the critical discourse analysis, like here, Chris Whedon believes that discourse is a formation of interconnected ideas which define the nature of certain experiences or things. And this discourse constitutes ways of seeing the world and guide possibilities for action. So it's much more powerful. Also, like Fairclough, here I rephrase it, that discourse is always contextual, multiple and shifting. It enables us as well as limits us on what we can think, say, and do. So for example, I'd like to illustrate this definition into this phenomena. This is a phenomena when we had like a bazaar, I guess, pasar malam, but it's not malam at all, I know. But this happens like less than 100 years ago. This picture was taken in around 1960s in the United States, and there is this one stall in that bazaar, which is called, this game was called Hit the Nigger Baby. Okay, nigger baby, hit the nigger baby. So in this game, all of these white people, these white children, okay, and they seem to enjoy this game, right? There is this tent, and in the middle of the tent, there is this hole, a big hole, not really big actually. And inside the hole, there is this nigger baby. You know, nigger means the black African baby. Well, maybe toddler, around 3 or 2 years old. And if we contextualize this kind of game today, then this is a very barbarous, violent, unacceptable kind of game, right? Can you imagine you hit someone and it's legally allowed? And this is just a game, okay? And if you can hit the baby and you make the baby cry, then you get a jackpot. So this is what the game is all about. And the one who throws is the white children. So that time, less than 100 years ago, this kind of game is accepted. This kind of game was considered as normal, but not today, because the dominant discourse that time was that the nigger baby, or even the nigger, was considered as the, what is it? They are even close to, I'm sorry to say this, it's not right to say this, but this is the very assumption that they've got that time. that the nigger was considered similar to animal. So it's okay for you to hit that nigger baby. So I know this is barbarous and it's really banal and violent and vigilant, whatever. But this is accepted. And it has shifted, right? Due to the many advocacy works made by the, well, Martin Luther King, for example, to shift the perception that we are also human beings. Okay, we're not the second class and so on. So they have this kind of resistance. The Black people, they have that kind of resistance and they fight for their rights to be considered as human beings as well. So that's a real example of discourse. The same thing we look at our experience, our past experience of colonialism before we really fought for our freedom. The colonial discourse of that it is okay for them to take our resources back, and ship them to European countries, and it's okay to exploit the nature. That's colonial discourses, and that's really dominant. So what can we do about this? I would like to make this discussion even more focused on the use of critical discourse analysis in the education sector or in the education field. Biar nggak bosan ya, karena ini diskusinya agak berat. Let's go back to menti.com. It's the same number, okay? And I'd like to hear from you after you know what discourse is all about in the perspective of critical discourse analysis. I want to hear from you, why do you think we need to learn critical discourse analysis within the education field? Okay, so I'll go back to menti.com and please go back to your Menti. Then I'll go back to Safari. Wait. Do you still keep the number? Okay. So I need to share the screen. Yeah, okay, right. So go to the same page, the same Menti and the same number. It's still under the same project. So you can consider this as the same thing. It's the same digit of number. I'll just, if you forget the number, then it's here, 18, 59, 13, 23. Okay, this is the second question. Go to the second question. Why do you think we need to learn or use critical discourse analysis in education? Okay. There is no right or wrong answer. I just want to hear from you. Why do you think we need to study this area in education? Okay. All right. CDA and ELT, critical reading. So what you mean by this is that, so this is different type of Menti. Previously, we used word cloud, so it only allows you to use words and keywords. But for this, you can use a whole sentence, so you don't have to put keywords in here. It's okay to put the whole sentence here. Okay, right. The first response that we've got is that critical discourse analysis should be used in English language teaching for critical reading. Okay. because by learning about CDA, we can improve the ability to understand the context, also cohesion and coherence, and make it more or build more logics in writing. Okay, that's good. Because when learners learn a language, they also need to understand the social, cultural, and perhaps political context of the text or the speech they encounter. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, for we can take this third reason. Okay, for the second reason, I guess if we're talking about cohesion and coherence, then that belongs to the area of textually oriented discourse analysis. So there are actually two kinds of discourse analysis. The first one that belongs to usually under Halidean paradigm. It's the textually oriented discourse analysis in which scholars will only see and look at what is inside the text, you know. So that's why it's called a textually oriented discourse analysis, because it puts its dominance in the text itself. By looking at its cohesion, coherence, and all of those cohesive devices and stuff. Although it claims to look at the context, however, the emphasis is still on the text. While when we are talking about critical discourse analysis, the text is simply some evidence, I would say, or some empirical data to illustrate the bigger relationship between the context and the text. So text is just, evidence, I would say, to illustrate the argument that you found within the social relationship or power relation between context and text. Okay, right. So maybe just these three. Thank you so much for your participation. I think we will just take this third reason. Okay, right. I'll stop share and let's go back to the slide. Yes. Okay, so if we're looking at the purpose, the big purpose of critical discourse analysis and try to apply it within the field of education, then I think the vision is even bigger. So you can actually use critical discourse analysis to disrupt dominant discourses. Okay, so for example, when I still remember that Hit the Nigger Baby, the dominant discourse that time is that the nigger baby is similar to children, to animal, right? Or the nigger baby, because at that time it was slavery, right? Slavery is a form of, I would say, crime that didn't recognize or acknowledge the human rights of certain groups of marginalized human beings. So that's why we have to disrupt that. And you can use that by using critical discourse analysis, because the spirit here is advocacy. Okay. And you can also challenge restrictive pedagogies in education. So for example, if the schooling system, for example, in Indonesia, before the examination was abolished, there is this national examination, and the day-to-day teaching was oriented to UN, yeah, national examination, then you can challenge that restrictive pedagogy. Teaching or day-to-day teaching should not be oriented towards only meeting the national exam, for example, because the teaching and learning process has become so boring. It's only drilling for meeting that criteria for UN. Ya kan, banyak yang bunuh diri, banyak yang stres gitu kan, anak-anak kelas 3 itu. So you can challenge that by using critical discourse analysis to look at the relationship between teacher and students, between students and the text, between students and their learning process, whether or not they have this ownership of learning, whether or not they love learning. You can use CDA to that extent. And third of all, you can also challenge passive acceptance of the status quo. For example, maybe that colonial discourse, for example, colonialism before there is this awareness of the national intelligentsia, colonialism was considered as normal. That was the status quo, right? And we passively accept that, although poverty and poverty and unequal access to resources was dire. So you can challenge that. Okay. And last but not least is that to reveal how texts operate in the construction of social practices. There are a lot of examples to this extent. For example, if we're talking about gender inequality, for example, and we're going to talk about this further in the next slides. I'll just go to the next slides. Okay. And I would like to make a disclaimer here that there are many varieties of critical discourse analysis, okay? And this is not to mention that this is a separate entity as compared to the textually oriented discourse analysis, atau TODA tadi ya. It's completely different. The core or the root difference is made within the emphasis, whether you want to emphasize on
apa Ki? Keterangan aktif.
Yeah. Whether you want to emphasize on the text or on the context, okay? But CDA itself is really diverse. And that's why I think I'm falling in love in this area, because it's really diverse and you can actually combine one stream of tradition with the other, as long as they don't they don't epistemologically contrived. They're not epistemologically contrived. So for example, the variety of CDA from the perspective of linguistics, then you could see the work of Norman Fairclough, Ruth Wodak, or Van Dyck, okay? Whereas from the post-structuralist perspective, then you will see here, it's actually the root, the founding father, I would say, is Michel Foucault, which unpacked the relationship between knowledge and power, or knowledge/power. Okay, and everything is then can be looked at from the discourse perspective. And then after that, there are numerous works coming from Foucault's thinking. There is like this Chris Whedon and Brown and Davis. And in other area, it's the feminist field. Actually, it's a branch of this post-structuralist thinking. And the CDA of this feminist area is Judith Butler and McNaughton, for example. But the main thing, although they are various and diverse, the key principles that we could actually take from these many approaches to critical discourse analysis is, there are two of them. The first is that critical discourse analysis investigate on how power operates through language, because power doesn't occur in the vacuum. And you can actually look at how power was manifested through the use of language. And second of all, the key principle is that critical discourse analysis, unlike the textually oriented discourse analysis, is very interdisciplinary. If you're using TODA, then it's pretty much linguistics. But if you're using critical discourse analysis, you have to be brave enough to travel across disciplines. You will have to look at, if you use feminist work, then for example, you will have to look at feminist theories. You will have to look at sociology, for example, of how gender is unevenly distributed. If you're looking at other things like education, but looking at it from post-structural perspective, then you will have to look at works or writing in sociology of education, for example, then that's what I mean by interdisciplinary. Okay. And yes, so here I would like to discuss the three branches of CDA one by one. Okay, first is CDA in linguistics or in the language studies, and here Van Dijk defines that CDA, if you're using it in the language studies, then it analyzes written and spoken text. So it's both. It's not only written, it's not only spoken, but it's both. And they aim to reveal the discursive sources of power, dominance, inequality, and bias. Okay, if you're familiar with TODA, TODA will simply look at how the structure of the cohesive devices, for example, or cohesion. But here with CDA, you want to unpack or reveal this power relation, the issue of dominance, the issue of inequality and bias. So it's social justice issue. And it will give you the tools to examine how these discursive sources are maintained and reproduced within social, political, and historical contexts. And when you're using that, you will be more sensitive to look at the social phenomena, whether some discourses will be dominant because it appears as natural. We will consider that as the truth even, or common sense, and some others are marginalized. But of course, or we can call it alternative, but of course, these alternative discourses will always have the potential to gain greater. Yeah, and if you use Fairclough's categorization or mapping of CDA, it's this one. You can start from the text, that's the inner core, and then you move broader to the discursive practices, so how the text is produced and reproduced, okay, and the social practice of how the text is used to maintain certain relationship. So this is one example of how I use this Fairclough or Van Dijk theories, or so I use language here to look at a broader relationship between the country or the state with each citizen. Believe me or not, here I only have one text or one word to analyze, that is the word kebijakan. Okay, so in this article, problematizing policy, a semantic history of the word policy in the Indonesian language. Here I mentioned that the very specific technique to do this analysis is by using semantic history, but the whole approach or the bigger approach that I use is actually critical discourse analysis. And critical policy studies is a Q1 journal. So it's, I would say it has a very strong peer review. And don't ask me about the peer review process, it's torturing. So here, if we map out this text, into Fairclough's map, then it's going to be this one. The text here, this is the text. Can I use, oh no, I cannot use some, tool or pencil for this. So the text here is the word kebijakan. So I question why in Indonesia we use the word kebijakan for policy, because in other countries, like for example in European countries, they use the word politic or politics, or any words that is still close to the word politics. to refer to the word policy. But in Indonesia, we use the word kebijakan as if it is wise. So that's my bigger concern over this analysis. So the text is the word kebijakan itself, and then the discursive practice is actually how this word is institutionalized within the state so that it can be used by the people. So it can create a false consciousness or ideology to Gramsci. So the discursive practices that is used by the New Order government was through language standardization, okay? Whereas the social practices is through the media and through speeches or the presidential statement and so on to reproduce the word kebijakan. Right, so this is just one example of how we could actually use critical discourse analysis in the education field. And this is another one from priceless to priced, but this is more philosophical rather than linguistics. But still, I use this framework to look at how the shift, to illustrate the shift that I've been having, and with Elizabeth this time, to look at how knowledge was used to be considered as something priceless, but then now it's all priced. Terutama kalau ada PTNBH itu ya, it's highly we need to focus on the income generating activities. So knowledge should be priced. And here I use several data from policies, from the rules made by the government. And this one too, it's the same. For this one is for the educational policy, another educational policy, it's called RSBI, or the International Standard School. Waktunya masih berapa ya, Pak Dias? Okay.
10 minutes left.
10 minutes, okay. Yeah, and this is the post-structuralist CDA. The founding father of this critical discourse analysis is Michel Foucault. So Foucault believes that knowledge is power, power is knowledge. Okay, so there are why? Because there are a lot of misuse or abuses of knowledge made by those people in power. Okay, and the focus of the critical discourse analysis is on the subjectivity or the subject position of just laymen of who we are. And discourses make available certain ways of seeing the world and certain ways of being in the world. And I've got this, and here the last one. Other than subjectivity, we also have agency. So it's not that we are all docile bodies, Foucault called that. Jadi kayak makhluk-makhluk hampa gitu ya, yang nggak bisa apa-apa. We can think, we can do, we have our own agency and independence, and that's why another concept that is central in this post-structuralist critical discourse analysis is agency. So Foucault believed that we have the capacity to recognize that discursive contestation, and so we can actually resist, subvert, and change the discourses. So this is just one example I made with Mas Teguh from Ubaya. We had this research together, and we wrote this article together in Gender and Education Journal. This is actually feminist and post-structuralist. That's why I said feminist. CDA is actually under the post-structuralist stream, but it's just one branch. So with this neoliberal system, leadership has been constituted or defined as something that is that needs to be very meritocratic, right? But then here, within the Indonesian context, we actually have another way of defining what constitutes as leadership. that is amanah. Ya kan? Jadi misalnya, it's very common to hear people say, when we congratulate them for having a new position, they will say, terima kasih, doakan semoga bisa amanah ya. Because leadership is amanah, that's our belief. And we use this word amanah as an alternative discourse to challenge meritocracy and transparency. Because in the common construction, then those middle management, for example, or middle leaders, they are accountable to their higher boss, right? So that's the order. Kajur ke dekan, dekan ke rektor gitu ya, rektor ke menteri. But then with amanah, kajur bisa langsung ke Tuhan, okay? Dean will go directly to God. So it's everything going back to God, because they believe that the leadership position is from God, not from their predecessor. Okay, so this is what the article is all about. But then in feminist discourse analysis, that we focus on how gender and power they are intertwined, and how they are related to discourse. So feminist post-structuralists, they want to go beyond the biological construction and psychological perspectives. For example, the discourse of femininity believe that what counts to be woman, what counts to be a good girl, there is that certain stereotypes or certain expectation of becoming a woman or a girl. And there is a very an interesting story or writing here written by my dear friend Tevina from UPI. Her area is PAUD, right? Early childhood education, and here she analyzed how children, even girl, in early childhood education, they know they have the agency they have the agency to define themselves as a girl. So it's not always a good girl is not always related to being a princess in which you play with Barbies, you wear skirt all the time or dress, and you're being soft and you're being compliant, ya, patuh, halus, senyum terus gitu ya, like a princess. No, young children can negotiate that concept or discourse of femininities even in the early childhood education. Isn't that interesting? So this is just one example of how we use critical discourse analysis in the area of feminist studies. And this is mine with Kirsten Locke, my second supervisor, by researching on the emergent female leaders in higher education. So I interviewed several female rectors in Indonesia, and then we found these two dominant discourse, empowerment and meritocracy, and that they are not always going together really well, but somehow they complement each other. Okay, and how to do critical discourse analysis, I think this is a very reductive way of doing it, but I guess to make it simpler, then first you need to decide what kind of social phenomena to investigate. Okay, social phenomena means that, for example, you want to analyze this online learning, for example. Okay, so you analyze, you decide that first, the social phenomena you want to investigate. And second of all, you identify the discourses. Discourses are a set of ideas within that phenomena. So for example, in online learning, for example, synchronous and asynchronous. So for example, synchronous learning is more reliable, for example. But we know that synchronous learning has a lot of issues, especially with Indonesia, in which we have a lot of issues with access to online learning, right? Kalau hujan listriknya mati, nggak bisa nge-Zoom. Or even those people who live in the very remote area, they don't even have access or reliable access to electricity or over internet connection. And after you could identify these courses, then you could identify the subjectivities caused by those discourses. Okay. So for example, what kind of subjectivities that you have if you what is it? If you for ini kan master ya S2. So what kind of subjectivities that you have as master student? Okay, it makes you feeling more proud to yourself, for example, or a lot of assignments, and juggling between studying and working, for example. Those kind of subjectivities that you feel is what is meant by these subjectivities. And then another step is the consequences enabled or inhibited by these subjectivities. And the last one is that, is there any alternative discourses? Is there any alternative reasons for you to subvert, for example, to resist the dominant discourse that we have identified before? So this is a very simple how to do CDAs, so CDA for dummies, I would say. And this is the step that I do. And yes, so I guess thank you so much for listening. I look forward to discussing this issue further with all of you. Thank you. Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Zulfa. It is very informative and interesting topics, I think. So talking about the CDA, actually, of course, there are so many fields of a study like social practice or political practice doing with the CDA. And I do hope there are so many students of registers, right, of Masters of English Education. So at least it will be like maps for them that this is not always teaching methodology, but also they can touch dealing with the CDA in education field. Very interesting discussion, Ms. Zulfa. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, now on, I open this question and answer sessions. So if you want to raise your questions, you may raise your hands with the emoticons here, or you may text your questions through chat box. All right. So first, I would like to ask Miss Wan. Miss Wan.
Yes.
Which one? Yes, it is the question from me. All right, so I'm interested in having some, understandings, the way how to, reveals the endurance of influence enigma versus situational influence enigma, and how to recover this kind of situations. Because it is happening in, in Indonesian classrooms.
So you mean you want to maybe measure the students' willingness to communicate in Indonesia situation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting because I do find some researchers, they measure the Chinese students learning English, and then they found they're quite interested because when I list a lot of skills or surveys in my slide, this is from the Western context. So in the maybe in Indonesia, maybe you can find your maybe culture orientation or something. So I do recommend that if you want to measure that, you can start with the trait one because it's easy to deliver the service to your students. I think it's quite convenient for this in Indonesia setting. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And one more questions. Dealing with your willingness to willingness to communicate for learners. One of them is interpersonal motivation. So by this interpersonal motivation, can you give examples how to enhance this kind of motivations?
In talking about the students' motivation, I think it's quite interesting, especially from Yeah, I think you can ask them to write down why they learn English, and also in terms of the classroom situation, I might suggest that you can ask them to write down maybe, for example, if for some situations, for example, the group activities or role play or maybe presentation, they lost the opportunities to have a chat with others or with in front of the class. You may ask them to write down that situations and then to ask them to recall back their feelings during that time, and then you can summarize all the situations, and then you can know more about their motivations in general and in specific. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Miss
you for your
Wang.
questions. That's really
Okay.
interesting.
There is one question from Yanwati in chat box. For Miss Wan and Miss Zulfa, what is the relation between discourse, analysis, and culture? So I guess this question is
I think it's
referred to Miss Zulfa, right?
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
thank
Okay.
you. That's a good question. Thank you, Yanti. Yeah, culture is that social context that we're living in, right? And it really depends on how we define culture. So, for example, when you want to analyze about how woman is constructed, then the culture that you want to define have to be very specific. So, for example, in the Japanese culture or in the Indonesian culture, for example, we've got this I'm afraid that we have to say that we are living in a patriarchal culture, and you have to look at several apparatuses or programs, let's say, made by the government to maintain that patriarchal culture. So, for example, during the New Order, even until today, but it was first made up during the New Order government, is that PKK. What do you call that in English? PKK, Program Kesejahteraan Keluarga, Family Welfare Program. It was made
yeah.
first in 1970s, I guess, or 1960s.
70s.
And that program was aimed to construct what counts as good women, what counts as good wives. Okay, there are certain criteria for that, and every woman in the village, even in the institution, they have to follow that, and there are some promises or pledge or whatever that women have to mention, and there are also the kind of peer pressure within women itself to support that program. So, for example, if I don't join the program in my village, then people will say, "Ini ibu apaan sih kok nggak ikut PKK gitu ya?" So I don't want to be defined by that kind of program. So that's why I don't join that. So that's just one culture. That's just one culture that you need to define before you do a critical discourse analysis. Okay, so there are many things. What is it? Culture is really big, but what I mean is that if you have made up your mind, if you have decided to analyze certain or investigate certain social phenomena, you have to make it more specific. So it's culture that is relevant to the study that you are doing. So that's why, for example, you want to do some feminist or women studies, then the culture that you refer to is that patriarchal culture. Even in Japanese, there is this saying that we hear, apa itu perempuan itu konco winking, kan? So there will never be. Konco winking means, sorry, Shirley, I'm speaking in Japanese. Konco winking means someone who walks at the back. Okay, so that means that the relationship between man and woman will never be equal. So it's always like this. So that's the kind of dominant discourse that you want to unpack and you want to resist. So that's why I find the alternative discourses. Thank you, Pak Dias.
Yeah, thank you. It's very clear, I think. Okay, so we go to the next questions. The question for Miss Wan. Hello, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. For Miss Wan, how is WTC in English related to attitude towards English? Perhaps you can suggest a relevant research articles on this.
Thank you for your question. I think this, how's your English related to attitude towards English? Yeah, we do have some researchers to do this. You might maybe later I will type this author's name and their research the paper into the chat box. It's from Japanese. They use the international postures to investigate students in Japan to study English. So yeah, I will put this later. And for the second question, I think it's for Zhu.
Right. For the second question for Ms. Zulfa, sometimes students are discouraged to research on topic of CDA because lecturers will ask, how would you relate this to education? And I guess we still sometimes see dichotomy between language and linguistic and pedagogy. So what is your take on this, and what CDA topics would you suggest for those who are new in researching CDA? Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a brilliant question.
It is
and-
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I feel you. Sometimes critical discourse analysis, although we're trying to identify the marginalized, we become marginalized ourselves, right? But I think it's still reasonable if your supervisors still want you to make it, still want you to convince them that you have to make your research relevant to the department, right? And I would do so. So that's why my presentation is very much specific how to use CDA in education. So my tips would be relate this to education. My take would be you decide the social phenomena within the education sector. There are lots of social phenomena. Tadi contohnya seperti UN, ya, the national exam is one example. You can also analyze, for example, the curriculum and how to look at the process of how this new curriculum has been socialized, and whose voice is dominant and whose voice is marginalized, for example. Or you can also the male and female relationship. That's, I think we have discussed about it. Or I just read this very interesting article using CDA on the synchronous and asynchronous process of online learning. And synchronous pedagogy has been a dominant discourse. So most of the education institutions believe that when you appear in your Zoom meeting like this, then you're considered as present. But when you are not, or when, for example, the lecturers design the teaching into asynchronous, and although we have a very deep intellectual engagement and interaction within our WhatsApp group, for example, it's not considered as 100% present. So there is this dominance of synchronous over asynchronous learning, and there are many issues in the synchronous forms or modes, like what I've told you before. Indonesia is still working on the access towards synchronous learning, because it requires stable internet connection, stable electricity, especially when we are in the rainy season like this, when there are lots of electricity blackouts and so on and so forth. But what I'm trying to say here is that there are actually so many social phenomena. So you try to decide which social phenomena in the education sector. So I would say, as long as it is within the education sector, then you could justify that your case is justifiable, that your case is relevant within the education sector. So that's my take on this.
So, all right. So actually, the case is from the social sectors, but then we try to have an education field within the social phenomena, right? Using the CTA. Okay, good. Thank you. And then the next question is from Aulia Zulfa. So Ms. Zulfa, if you want to write about CDA, especially about themes such as feminisms, empowerments, or another debatable topics, what things should we pay attention in without deviate the theme itself, especially for amateurs that have interest in writing CDA, but have little knowledge about this. Thank you. So, amatir nih. All right.
Yeah, me too. The first thing first is reading. We have to read a lot. And as I said before, you have to be brave to travel across disciplines. Reading not only references in ELT, for example, the text that you are familiar with, but you have to be brave enough to read other resources in empowering feminism than in feminist literature, or if you want to deviate the theme. So I guess if you read, if you have read several solid articles or books, then maybe over and over again, if you've got the grasp of the landscape of CDA, then I don't think you will deviate from the theme. You will know that first you're talking about empowerment, for example, how literacy or how reading a program. Okay, so for example, if you are analyzing, or if you're analyzing some literacy programs in the village, program like Huruf misalnya di desa, and you want to relate that to empowerment program for women, okay, and how, if you've read a whole bunch of literature and you have these two phenomena, you want to try to relate these two phenomena, then you will know that you deviate from the theme. Masa tiba-tiba ngomongin tentang you cannot just, you will not forgive yourself. You're talking about, for example, children literacy, for example. That's beyond the area, and you know that. And your supervisor, I guess, they will warn you. No, you've been out of the track. Go back. Gitu kan? Itu fungsinya pembimbing kan? I think.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, we are all amateurs to some extent.
Yeah. Thank you, Aulia, for the questions. Thank you, Ms. Wan, for the information. These references. All right. So I go to the next questions. Oh, no more questions from students. From Aris, yeah.
Thank you. Yes. This question for Ms. Zulfa. It's related or not, I don't know, because my question is how to develop motivation, because I assume that students under pressure for learning English or second language, even that teachers and students spend at least a quarter of their daily time in school. So the important thing is teachers can solve many problems of the educational environment using different ways. And then talk about this course. How to make a small group or classroom interactions, maybe, because I believe that teachers play important roles. So teachers talk should be clear and should contain no errors. That's yeah, how to develop motivation. I think it's related or not.
Okay, okay, thank you, Aris. I guess this question is probably for Miss Wan. So how to develop students' motivation and teachers' motivations once in times, especially for high schools.
Hmm. Thank you for your questions. I think this is really, really important. Even for me, I do find sometimes it's really hard for me to improve my students, even just only one students who want to learn Chinese and even, hey, got very high motivation in the beginning. But during the class, I do find sometimes he sometimes feels a little bit tired or something, some sort of like this. So yeah, back to your question, could you specifically give me some examples? Because it's kind of like a little bit general. Hi, are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Aris, can you give me examples in what case students or
So
teachers?
you mean your students is
develop
high school students, right?
the high school students?
The example. How to make a students not under pressure for learning. I don't know how to do this. The example, because learning a second language is a big challenge, yeah, for the teachers maybe. So in facing different backgrounds, how to, I don't know how to. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is quite huge questions, but I think you mentioned that group, how to improve maybe in group. And I think individually, we are just one job, right? Together, we are the ocean, I might say this. So maybe you can group your students into several groups, and then you might ask them to write down what difficulties they face when they study English, and then you can change their difficulties and to ask a different group to give the solutions to each group. I think this is quite important because normally we think this problem is problem, but for others they might not think this is a problem, right? So you might give them time to write down their difficulties and to swap them and to give the solutions to each other, and also you can get more difficulties about this, and then you can find your solutions and in relation to your students. Thank you.
Okay, is that answering your questions, Aris?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Aris, thank you. Is there more questions, ladies and gentlemen, participants?
Okay, if I might ask a question, Shirley. Hi. In your research, I mean, like, we have different cultural background, right? From your student in your participant Chinese learners in New Zealand studying. Are they learning English?
No, they're learning Chinese.
Oh, they're learning Chinese. Okay, so it's
Yeah.
like kind of like they speak English, their mother tongue is English, but they learn Chinese.
Yeah. They are new.
Okay.
They are Kiwi person.
So okay, so probably the feature is a bit similar to Indonesian students learning English, right? Because they're not their mother tongue, and then it's like second and foreign language for Indonesian students. How do you in your participants, do you also have kind of like the challenge where your participants are not willing to communicate because they feel that if they talk they will make a mistake or something? So because it's like my student here in Indonesia, and it's very common, I guess it's like I teach university students who will be English teachers in the future, hopefully, or if whatever they want. But mostly my students have problems in not willing to share their thoughts because they are afraid of making mistakes, especially the grammatical mistakes. So how do you encourage your student when you come across this kind of issue in your Chinese learners? Because like we have like the background is probably a little bit similar, but not really, but it's quite close because they're like learning both foreign language for them. So what is your take? How do you deal with this kind of challenge in your students and in your participants?
Yeah, actually, in my study, I didn't do that. But yeah, I can talk about this because because today I just shared the Tony. This is a pilot, and he is quite person who always dealing with the staff from the government. So he's quite communicative. So and you can say the things. And also, I got another student. She is just graduate from university, and she's quite anxious person. I think that could be like you mentioned your students, right? And I do find, even I didn't do anything to encourage her when it's to communicate, but I think my findings also support the previous research. They mentioned that if you ask your students to pay more attention to their the situations which create their willingness to communicate or unwillingness to communicate, and or sort of like this, and then they will become more aware of their situations. Even in their journal, she mentioned that after she reports many situations, she felt really willing to communicate. Or, for example, she reports she felt unwilling to communicate in the openings, just right beginning of the class, because she said, I don't know, in one-to-one class, she has to say hello to her students. She didn't know if she say 你好, which means hello in Chinese, but this is not very common if you're greeting someone in Chinese. So she felt very, very anxious during the at the beginning of the class, and then and then she reports after she feeling a lot of kind of like, because after each session she has to fill in the journal, and then she reports. After that, she encouraged herself to say great to her tutor. I think this is very, very important, because students have to become aware of their her difficulties, and then you can give her some solutions, or maybe she can find their own solutions to encourage herself. I think this I can give you the suggestion for now. Thank you for your question, Seti.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Shirley. It's quite interesting because like as learners, probably your learners are more advanced compared to my learners, because my learners are still quite young, right? They are mostly like just graduated from high school, so they're quite young, and although they've been exposed to foreign language for probably 6 years or so, but the exposure to the language itself is not as extensive as they expect to be. So that's why the mastery of the language that they're learning are not, they haven't achieved the full. Yeah.
There's a difference between the maybe not long adult and adult language learning. I think that's different.
So your learners are adults at the moment?
Yeah, adults.
Okay. So it's like they have like their agency in choosing the learning the language itself,
Yeah,
it's not burdened by the obligation to follow a certain class or something, right? Because
yeah,
they
yeah,
want to learn the language because they want to. While
yeah,
these students of mine, they learn the language because they have to. And so it's
Mm.
kind of like different
It's
level
kind of
of
like out from outside, the motivation from
yes, the motivation of from outside, and your learners are the motivation is from inside. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like different set of different kinds of pressure that my students are experiencing compared to the one that you are dealing with. Is that right?
Mm. Yeah, we can talk about this later. I think it's quite interesting if you can do some research in your country too about this. I think it's quite interesting. It's
Yeah.
totally different. Not totally different, but I think it do have some difference between here and in Indonesia.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Shirley. Back to you, but yes.
Okay, thank you, Shirley. So based on this inbox chat, there is no more questions to Nuno. So can we close these sessions? Or is there any more questions from the participants? I guess not. All right, so can we close, Nuno? Or we wait for a while
Okay.
until
There's one student asked question. A girl
I
is
go?
raising
Okay.
his hand. Yeah. Okay. So.
Oh, okay, go.
Okay, thank you very much for time. Yeah, I think this discussion is very interesting, but yeah, unfortunately, I cannot join full, yeah, because I'm teaching. Yeah, what I want to share or what I want to ask is about the Bunung or the presenter explain about the how we encourage our students or in what is it in sharing their idea or something like that. But here now I'm teaching for the kindergarten student. Is that the same way how to encourage the students, because maybe Bunung is talking about the university students, of course kinds of different when we are encouraging the university student and the here adult and the child. Is it different way or something?
Okay, so Ego, just to be clear, I'm not the presenter here. I'm just answering, just
I
giving the
forget
feedback or
about the name
something.
of the presenter.
Shirley and Zulfa.
Shirley, yes.
So yes, okay. So yeah, okay. Shirley, maybe you can help Ego with the question.
Yeah, I think this is quite interesting
And
because
also Zulfa, you're open to jump anytime.
yeah.
You can jump
Last
anytime.
year, I also did some online language learning with some children in Philippines through Zoom. In the beginning, it's really, really hard. I didn't imagine because for adults Chinese learning, I just maybe one session, I just spent at least 1 hour to prepare that session. I think that's totally enough. But for the children, I think it's really hard in the beginning. But I think the first thing is I think the language learning between children, especially from the kindergarten and the adult, is different, right? And so I'll suggest, based on my personal teaching experience, I should say, I think so. First, you just set some goals beforehand. How many words you want to teach, and how many sentences you want to teach, and then also you should set some. I think I do recommend the games. Maybe, for example, if I teach them the numbers, I may ask them to sing a song or to do some handicraft, something like this, and to encourage them to use some words, not just learn some words, just to use that words to describe, oh, how many flowers you cut it, or to sing this song, and then they will feel so happy and enjoy your class. And then you will find when they are using these words and then they are learning these words. I think this is incorporated each other. Yeah. I'm not sure if I answer your question. I will leave that to Zu.
Zulfa.
Okay, thank you, Shirley. So that means we have to set the goal what we what we want to achieve. Yeah. For example, today I'm going to teach for vocabularies. So I need to set the goal, what I need to prepare for that. Okay. Of course, to make the interesting learning. Yeah. It's not only speech learning.
Yeah,
But games, singing, and
yeah. You can set your goal, and then you can break down your class into several sections, and then in this section, what activities you want to use and game you want to employ, something like this.
Okay, how about, talking about game, is it still possible when we do it in this pandemic? For example, we are teaching by Zoom, by Gmeets like this. Yeah, we do not teach them directly. So is it
so
still possible
you
to
also use the Zoom to teach them?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's really hard. I set some games in my PowerPoint, even just several words. I think to prepare the PowerPoint, I have to spend like several hours to play just several slides. So I think it's time consuming, but it's worth it in the beginning. You should, yeah.
Yeah, it means that teaching English for kids and teaching English for adults is different way, right? So we need
Okay.
more efforts to teaching
Yep.
kids.
Jump in anytime, Zulfa. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's really possible to use games to teach English. There are lots of platforms that we can actually out there, and it's free. You can use like Kahoot or quizzes. Or even you can play with Menti, like what I did before. It's not game basically, but you can actually tailor that platform to suit your purposes. That is to creating a fun environment in your classroom. But if you want to pure games, then you can use quizzes or Kahoot or any other platforms. There are so many platforms. Just browse online platforms, games, teaching English gitu nanti there are lots of prompts that you can use and explore those things. But yes, as Shirley said, that you need to devote some time to really prepare for the game. But once you carry out that games for your students, it's worth it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Danke.
Thank you. Thank you, Ego, for the questions.
Yeah.
Is there any more comments from the participants? We are still waiting.
Okay. Bu Zulfa, just a little bit about your topic. Sorry, I missed your presentation because I had to attend a meeting. But I read some of your work, the one that you present the other day on the writing bootcamp, and also like talking about a little bit about discourse, where so this is maybe not in the topic that we're talking about today, but I just want to, what is it? How do you perceive? Because it seems like I agree with you when you said that we live in a patriarchal country, and it's like really suffocating sometimes to be alive in this kind of like environment where you're not allowed to have the same opportunity or the same like open acceptance about being a woman, and then you're being in a position of power. Because I read your work as well. Your dissertation is about the rectors, female rectors, right? The leaders. So those leaders mostly are women. And so the challenge that the woman has to face while in power, it's like, I don't know how they deal with it, but because the pressure comes not only from the institution where they have power, but also from the people closest to them in terms of running the organization. So I would like you to explain it a little bit, how to navigate, because some women are in power and they also have responsibilities at home, and how to deal best with a person who doesn't want to accept that woman can be in a position as well, higher position than the man. So this might be a little bit delicate of a topic question. So, but if you can elaborate, if you can elaborate on that, it would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Bunu, for the question. It's a really difficult question, but I'll try to answer. Yes. I agree with you that there are more challenges that women have to face if they are in that managerial or leadership position more than men. Okay, and historically speaking, leadership is a masculine domain, especially in the higher education. It is actually an irony, I would say, that leadership in higher education is highly masculine domain. Why? Because higher education or universities is actually the place to discuss these progressive ideas, to discuss about women equality, to discuss about those ideal conditions. However, it doesn't come for real when we're talking about, who gets what and who does what. And historically speaking, woman has been in that subordinate level in which in the university, women are positioned as someone who deal with domestic chores. Domestic chores here is dealing with students with problems, with issues. For example, if in the department there is the students with some problems, then udah sana konsultasinya sama bu ini gitu. So they are expected to be mother, and they are expected to do some mothering jobs, even when they're not at home, even in the working place. So here I would say that university is actually an extension of house, of that construction of home. So therefore, men in the working place or in the university, they are considered as, carefree and careless, and therefore opportunities or responsibilities that are dealing with mobility, for example, or strategic programs and so on and so forth, decision making, they have to be made by men. There is this very, a very delicate quote, I would say, talking about this is that, men can be leaders even before they open their mouth, simply because they are men. So that's the privilege that men have and the privilege that we women do not have. We have to work like double, even triple, even 4 times than men to achieve certain levels. So that's why when women can break the glass ceiling, the concept of this is glass ceiling, you can see what's above you, but there is this hindrance or a blockage that block your way. So when women can break the glass ceiling and they can go up, especially in this internationalized university. So it's everyone who have international network, who have certain qualification, PhD, for example, that can occupy certain leadership position. And within this meritocratic environment, it is not only men who will have that kind of opportunity. Logically speaking, it's also women. But when women can achieve that level, of course, there are many challenges and tensions that they have to deal with. And it's not only coming from men, but also from women. So what we need to have here is actually a shared vision between women or female leaders or female colleagues or self, that we need to have that kind of solidarity. So it's not individual competition to achieve something, but it has to be solidarity, standing in solidarity. I know I'm going back to Marx theory, but I guess this still works. So that's why my current research is investigating on female academics within this pandemic. So the title is Female Academics and the Pandemics, in which we, female academics, we face more challenges than men, because with this blurring boundaries between home and work, we work from home, but at home we have also our own domestic works. So the multiple challenges that we face is sometimes overwhelming. So what we can do is taking care of each other, and and maybe from that we can have a solid voice to be heard by those in leadership position of how to have a university or a working place that is sensitive to this kind of situation, to women's needs especially. How to, for example, just a very simple, simple practice, like we don't do meeting at 8 p.m. at night, because it doesn't mean that when our Zoom meeting is just in our phone, but it doesn't mean that we can be in the meeting for the rest of our life. So that's clear distinction between work and home needs to be made, especially within this pandemic time, where there is this blurring boundaries between that home and work. I hope I answer your question, but I don't think so.
Well, it gives me like enlightenment about, yes, I agree with that blurring boundaries at home, especially when we have to work from home. I don't know in other household, but it seems like some people have, especially in the men counterpart, they can just shut the door of their bedroom and say, I'm working, and the kids will not disturb them. But the mother cannot do the same, because the kids will be looking for them, and they know that their mother is at home. Not for the mommy, not for the mommy, because the kid will be looking for them and for the food, for whatever they want. So yeah, I think it's really insightful what you just shared, and thank you. I have I still don't know how to navigate with this kind of domain, because I'm one of those, and you're one of those as well. Woman in position. So we are both in a the context where we have to be threading the road carefully, because of us being women. So yeah, thank you so much. Your explanation is really insightful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zulfa. So there is a question for Dr. Huan from Ajeng. In your research, did you find any difference in students' willingness in the way they communicate in writing and speaking, or their communications? So the question is in chat box.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one. Thank you for your question. Yeah, but my study is not going, the focus of my study is not focused on this, but I have some articles can share with you. If you want, I can share with you. You can look at. Is that okay for you?
Yeah.
Could you let me leave your email to me? I can share with you later.
Yeah. I'm giving you my email address.
Yes.
So
Yes, please.
Yeah, later,
Yeah, I will send you
I-
the articles.
yeah. Thank you, Dr. Juan. It was very interesting. Sorry that I write the question on the chat box because my internet connection is not really stable. I'm afraid that when I'm talking, then I will lose. I just curious that if the students, your students, or maybe in your article or in your research, you find some students' willingness willingness or they're reluctant in the way they express their idea using the words, because I see it in my students when they write something, even they have a not really grammatical writing, but actually they have good words or word choices in their writing rather than they have a direct communication. When I ask them directly, especially in online learning, they just prefer to use Indonesian words rather than English. But I see when they write something, they can express their ideas, they can have good words, they make a good writing then, even the simple one. So I was also curious whether you also did the research or you find the same experience. Then if you have any article, then maybe I can read it just to
Yeah.
give me more insightful knowledge about the students' communication willingness and reluctancy in using English words or using English. Thank you, Dr. Huan.
That's you're welcome. So you can leave your email to me. I will send it to you.
Later. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will hand back to Dr. Diaz.
Okay. Okay, Miss Wan, thank you for the answers. Thank you, Ajeng, for the questions. Is there any more questions from the participants, please? Okay. All right. So is there any participants from teachers?
We have teachers, lecturers, students.
Yeah, we have teachers, lecturers, students.
All kinds of things.
So, Miss Wan, actually, I am interested in having this kind of research combination. I mean, in your presentation, you mentioned a lot about the interviews and then the focus group discussion as well as the observations. So, in these such conditions like pandemic outbreaks, how do we have any observations? What should we do with this kind of observations approach? Is there any suggestions? Because can we do observings using kind of kind of tools in observing our participants of the research, our samples, our populations, dealing with this research combinations, especially for measuring the students' communication.
So you mean because I didn't mention the observations research approach, right? You mean that one? Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Thank you for your question. This is really interesting because in the beginning, I actually wanted to use that approach to find out what kind of when it communicates behavior means. Because if we use the interview or maybe the interviews, journals, this is from their self-reports, from the student's perspective. But if we use the observations, how should we measure the learners when it communicates behavior? So from outsider, so from the teachers, from the researchers. Yeah, there was so for the observations, first you will have a scheme. So there was very not very there is a scheme used to measure the students when it's communicating, such as they may initiate a question. So this you can count this as the when it's communicate behavior. Why I'm not using that observation in my study? Because my study is one-to-one, so it's kind of like still the teachers has asked the students question and then they had to respond. So how should I say this response is has willingness to communicate or unwillingness to communicate? That's why I didn't use that observation. But I think for especially for here, I know there are several teachers. You are teaching the like traditional classroom. There are so many students in your classroom, so you might use that scheme to count your students when it communicates. Yeah.
All right. Very clear.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for your
Thank you, Miss Wan. Thank you. So I guess, ladies and gentlemen, we finally come to the end of this symposiums. And before I close the session, I would like to take some conclusion from what the speakers has presented. So Ms. Wan mentions a lot about the willingness to communicate. There are some indicators, desires, self-confidence, interpersonal motivation, and so on. And it is followed by, the traits and dynamics, including enduring influence, enigma, and situational influence, enigma. It is followed by the second conclusions, what has already presented by Ms. Zulfa. So mentioning about revealing how text operates in the construction of the social practice and of course political practice as well. And within the fields of language education, CDA is also appropriate for the study in education and social fields, as well as the students, you need to study more across disciplines field of study. So that's all the conclusions of the presentation presented by the speakers. And I would like to thanks to the speakers for the informative and interesting presentations, and all participants for the very active participations. Finally, give applause for the speakers and for you all.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. See you again for the next installments, fourth installments in International Symposiums of Masters of English Education, Universitas PGRI Semarang. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Zulfa and Shirley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was
Thank you,
amazing.
Shirley. Thank you.
Well done.
Zulfa.
Well done. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.